we'll continue where we have stopped in the last class. We were talking about the necessity of going for electron diffraction. We said though X-ray diffraction is very good, and to be actually very honest, I should say the accuracies of lattice parameters that you can measure using X-rays, you cannot get the same accuracy in an electron microscope. Electron microscope is always used only as a kind of confirmation tool. Also, more importantly, to find out, as I was telling you, that wherever there are small fractions of phases, initial stages of precipitation, and when you have particles which are very, very small in nature, which your X-ray is not able to show you. Are some cases where I will tell you a little later, where, for example, when you are talking of order disorder, there are difficulties. We will come to it. What are the difficulties in XRD? I have already talked about the problems of XRD in terms of order disorder when we were talking about XRD. But when we talk about electron diffraction, we will touch upon them a little later. And so accepting in such cases, X-ray diffraction is always the best because it gives you the accuracies in terms of lattice parameters as 0.001 angstroms. In fact, with the best XRDs, you can even get one more decimal. I mean, though this is very difficult to achieve, but people have demonstrated in case of single crystal XRDs that one can achieve that kind of. This kind of accuracies in lattice parameter calculations is next to impossible in case of electron microscopy. The reason is because of the aberrations that we have. We don't have such aberrations because we don't have lenses in an X-ray diffraction. There are no lenses. As long as you have lenses, you have problems. You have to live with those problems. So similarly, optical microscope, we have lenses, we have difficulties in terms of resolution. Here, I am using the same electron microscope, not only as a microscope, but also as a diffractometer. And this electron microscope, I am using an electron beam, which has to be focused, and it has to be focused by a lens, and lens gives all its aberrations to that particular electron beam which is falling on the sample, and as a result, whatever problems that you have associated with those lenses have to be borne with, and as a result, the calculations that we are going to have difficulties. So keeping that in mind, if you try to see the electron diffraction is a technique particularly used, one where you have small fractions of. Second is we use it whenever you have, for example, your interest is to know the nature of the precipitates, nature of second phase, whether it is coherent or incoherent or semi-coherent. This information XRD cannot give you. Third, you want to see the defects in the let's say material, for example, dislocations. Of course, X-ray also is used to calculate the dislocation densities. In fact, one can use the X-ray peak broadening to be able to calculate the dislocation density, but these are all indirect ways of calculating, whereas here you can see them. You can actually see the dislocations, and that is one. Not only dislocations, you can see stacking faults. And if you actually go to what is called high resolution electron microscopy, you can even see vacancies where you are able to go up to the atomic resolution level. Then obviously when there are periodic arrangement of atoms in a 2D, if I am seeing there are all atoms arranged and suddenly there are a few regions where an atom is missing, you will be able to see those vacancies also. So you will be able to see the defects and also many other features, particularly in case of fine structures, for example. Fine structures, when I say nanostructures in materials. So these are the general reasons why we use this, and in that connection, we will first we have already talked about how to use this as a microscope, but we will now see more about the diffraction. We all know that lambda equal to 2d sin theta. This is the standard equation, right? And because this is an equation which talks about diffraction, the same principle holds good even when we are talking about electron diffraction. The only difference between electron diffraction and X-ray diffraction is that the lambda that I use is different. For example, in an X-ray diffraction, for example, lambda of copper K alpha is approximately 1.54 angstroms. Right? Possibly all of you are aware of this. And if I use a, let's say, 200 kV TEM, I have a lambda there which is of the order of 0.02 angstroms, not 2 or not 2.5 angstroms. You can see the kind of level difference, almost like 2 orders lower. And because it is 2 orders lower, go back to this equation. You will see if the lambda is very small, for any given plane, D is what? D is A by square root h square plus k square plus L square. You only told this to me. Right? So for a given D, having a particular, for a particular plane having a particular D, the theta depends only on the lambda. Right? From that equation. So if the lambda is very small, the theta is very, very small. Right? So you can actually see that because the theta is very small, you will be able to see much more number of what are called the diffraction peaks. In case of XRD, it is peaks. In case of TEM, it is not actually peaks, because as I told you, if you have a sample and if the beam is going and the beam gets transmitted and beam also gets diffracted. So if you have a screen here on which the diffracted beams are all falling, and those diffracted beams, when they fall, what will you see them on a screen? When a beam is falling on a screen, what do you see? You see a spot, right? So you see spots which are all coming from various planes. Each spot represents a particular plane, because each beam that is coming, in case of an X-ray, what do I see? These are all come as peaks. In a powder diffraction pattern, every HKL, for example, in a FCC, this is 111, this is, let's say, 200 and 220. This is how it is. So each HKL plane comes out as a peak in an X-ray diffraction, powder diffraction. Of course, if you do not use powder diffraction, if I use a Laue diffraction, you will also see these spots. So actually, pinhole pattern, people call it as Laue pattern. Some people also call it as. So electron diffraction is almost like a Laue pattern, that you have the beams going through the sample and come out here. One beam will come out as a transmitted beam. The intensity of the transmitted beam that is coming out is going to depend on how thick is this sample. Yesterday we talked about it, and that's the reason why we said we need to make it very thin, so that the electrons are not scattered away by the sample and sufficient energy of the electron beam comes out. So this particular beam which hits here is what is called transmitted beam, and this is what is called a diffracted beam. And if I see this in this plane, if I look at in this plane, it looks generally, I mean, it can be something like this, just like a rangoli, depending on what planes are giving the diffraction. Each dot that you see corresponds to a particular plane. Like each peak here corresponds to a particular plane, here each dot corresponds to a plane. And because of theta being very small, that means this particular theta, what is this angle? Can somebody tell me? It is 2 theta. Very good. Why? Because this is the angle between the transmitted beam and the diffracted beam. Even if you look at normal X-ray diffraction, if this is my sample, if this is the incident beam and this is the diffracted beam, so this is theta, this is theta. But if I look at the angle between the incident beam and the diffracted beam, this is 2 theta. Right? So if this is the incident beam and this is the diffracted beam, the angle is 2 theta. So it is not theta, but it is 2 theta. And if this 2 theta, if it is very small, then I will have large number of peaks. Whereas in a normal X-ray, large number of HKL planes can be seen in the diffraction pattern. Whereas in a normal XRD, because of depending on what is the lattice parameter, if the A is very large, then what D? If A is large, D is large. Okay, if D is large, what happens to theta? Theta will decrease. So in case of crystals which are big crystals where the lattice parameters are very large, then the theta will be very small. So if I calculate what is the maximum value of the theta that I can accommodate, the maximum value of theta that I can accommodate is 90 degrees. Because when theta is 90, sin theta is 1. That is the maximum. So if I can find out what is the D max, smallest D that I can accommodate, smallest D that I can accommodate can be defined as D equal to lambda by 2. Right? So if I put maximum value of sin theta as 1, D equal to lambda by 2. So this is the definition. So if I start looking at what is the D for 111, what is the D for 200, what is the D for 220, and I keep on going down. So as I go to bigger and bigger number in terms of HKL, what is happening? The D is decreasing. Why the D decreases? Because the formula, this is in the denominator. So as the D decreases, once the D becomes larger, smaller than this value, then you will not be able to see that D at all. So how many peaks I will be able to see in my diffraction pattern depends on this lambda. And not only depends on lambda, it also depends on my A. So if I have two crystals, both are FCC, let us say, one is, let's say, an aluminum, another is something like, let's say, platinum. Both of them have different lattice parameters. The one which has a higher lattice parameter, because for the higher lattice parameter, D of the 111 for that will be smaller. So as a result, which one will show me more number of peaks, whether it is a sample with a higher lattice parameter or the sample with a lower lattice parameter? If I compare the two cases, for example, I take a case, let's say let's say where lattice parameter A is 4 angstroms in one case, in another case A is 2 angstroms, and if I calculate D of 111 for this A, I will find out that A is 4 by root 3, right? In the other case it is 2 by root 3. And if my lambda is 1.54 divided by 2, this is 0.75, let's say. Right? So the moment the lambda becomes small, the moment D becomes smaller than 0.75, I will not be able to see that peak at all. Only up to 0.75, all the Ds, all the HKLs which have Ds greater than 0.75, I will be able to see. So if I start calculating like this, you will see that as the lattice parameter of a material keeps on decreasing, because the D automatically starts decreasing, then as a result, this particular sample will not be able to show me. If I now calculate, for example, for 220, D of 220, if I calculate for this, it is 4 by root 8, right? And D of 220 for the other sample is 2 by root 8. Which is smaller? This is smaller, right? And can somebody calculate if you have lattice parameter and tell me the number? What is 2 by root 8? What is 4 by root 8? This is, if you take it as 2, take it out, it is square root 2, 2 root 2. So this goes off. Okay, it is 2 by root 2 and 1 by root 2. 2 by root 2 and 1 by root 2. What are these values? Okay, so whatever it is. So you will see that this particular definitely number is bigger than this. This comes closer to 0.75. That means what? I will be able to possibly see this, and if it is smaller than 0.75, I will not be able to see 220 peak at all in my sample, which has a lattice parameter of 2. But I will be able to definitely see the 220 peak of this sample whose lattice parameter is 4. And not only the 220, I may be able to see the next peak also. Because next peak also, which is, let's say, what is the next peak after 220? HKL or unmixed is the condition, right? So what is the next peak after 220? 311. All are odd, right? So this is the next, which is the square root of the summation is 11. So it is 4 by 11 now. So calculate what is 4 by 11, and if that value is greater than 0.75, I will still have that peak also. So this clearly tells me that the larger the lattice parameter, the more the number of peaks I will be able to see in a XRD pattern. For a particular K alpha, which is, let's say, 1.54, and if the lattice parameter of my sample, whatever sample that I am dealing with, if it is smaller, then I will not be able to see more number of peaks. In fact, there are cases where you may be only seeing a 2 or 3 peaks only in an XRD pattern for certain crystal structures, and from those 2 or 3 peaks, you may not be able to determine what is the crystal structure and calculate its lattice parameters. These are problems, and that is the reason why if you want to have more number of XRD peaks in an XRD, what do? My sample is fixed. I have an aluminum sample, let's say, whose lattice parameter is fixed. I want to get more number of peaks in my XRD pattern. Yes, lambda should be very decreased. I should use a smaller lambda. So instead of copper K alpha, I go to molybdenum K alpha. Molybdenum K alpha is 0.7 angstroms. So this is how people do that. So they go to a smaller, and that is exactly what I am doing in a TEM. Okay, I am going to a smaller lambda, and as a result, I can see more peaks, more planes in my diffraction pattern, and these planes will appear as peaks. That is the first advantage of an electron diffraction pattern. Advantage and disadvantages depending on how you look at it, because sometimes you have too many spots for you to be able to get confused what is the actual crystal structure. But provided you are getting it from one single grain, you will be able to analyze that. How do you analyze? We will come to it in a minute now. This is the first difference between XRD and TEM, that because the lambda is small, I am able to get more number of peaks. And the advantage is I can analyze the diffraction pattern better when you have large number of peaks. Many a times, for example, you might have heard in one of the lectures that we were talking about, if I want to find out, given a sample, whether this is BCC or simple cubic. Let's say somebody has given you a sample and told you use XRD to find out whether it is BCC or simple cubic. It has to be one of these two only. It is not anything else. Then you will know that if you want to find out that whether these are either that or this, you need to have a minimum certain number of peaks. How many? 7 peaks are necessary. If you XRD pattern has less than 7 peaks, you will not be able to differentiate these two. So that is where the need of going to a smaller lambda is useful. That is where I go to, let's say, a molybdenum or some such smaller lambdas to be able to find out. Okay, so this is how there are necessities, certain cases where you are forced to go to a smaller lambda to be able to actually determine the crystal structure. Now, if I look at this particular pattern that I am seeing in this diffraction pattern, we call it as a diffraction pattern. Because there is a certain pattern in it, we call it as a diffraction pattern. And this diffraction pattern, similar to X-ray diffraction pattern which has peaks, has certain characteristics. And the characteristics here are that there is a certain symmetry in this particular diffraction pattern. And the symmetry comes from the planes which are giving this diffraction. Whenever I have a beam falling on a sample, and imagine that there is a unit cell, let us say a cubic unit cell, and my electron beam is falling like this. Depending on what plane it is perpendicular to, the symmetry of that particular plane is reflected in the diffraction pattern. Depending on which plane this beam is perpendicular to, you will be able to see that symmetry very easily. And for example, the moment I see a symmetry like this, what is this symmetry? Can somebody tell me? Rotational symmetry. Can you see any rotational symmetry in that? Maybe. Have you heard of rotational symmetries? Okay. What are the rotational symmetries that you are aware of? Two-fold, three-fold, four-fold, six-fold. Do you see any one of them in that? There is a four-fold symmetry, provided this is equal to this, and if this angle is 90 degrees. Right? It's like a square which has a four-fold symmetry. So this is also almost like that. So there is a four-fold symmetry in this. The moment there is a four-fold symmetry in the diffraction pattern, that means the plane from which the diffraction is coming should also have a four-fold symmetry. Otherwise, you will not see this. And which are the crystal structures where I can find a four-fold symmetry? Cubic. Anything else? Nothing else? There is no other crystal structure where I can see? Yes? Tetragonal. What is the difference then? Can you tell me? What is the difference between cubic and tetragonal then? In terms of symmetry. Both have four-fold symmetry, but is there a difference? Yes? One four-fold in what? Tetragonal. And in cubic? Three four-folds. This is the difference. And if I consider this as a four-fold, and this as a four-fold, and this as a four-fold, the angle between any two four-folds is 90 degrees. Right? So in principle, the moment I see a four-fold symmetry, I now know definitely this particular crystal structure is either cubic or tetragonal and nothing else, because no other crystal structure has any plane which has a four-fold symmetry. Right? So as a result, now I have been able to eliminate all other things. And among these two, now how do I confirm? Can somebody guess and tell me? I want to now confirm that it is only cubic or tetragonal. How do I do that? To do that, there is a facility in TEM. The facility that I have in the TEM is I can rotate this sample. Okay? I can tilt the sample. In principle, one can also tilt the beam. But the beam tilt is very limited, but the sample can be significantly tilted by plus 40 degrees to almost minus 40 degrees. So it's not a complete 360-degree rotation tilting, but so if you have a sample like this, which is kept sample holder, the sample holder can be tilted like this or tilted like this. When I am tilting, what's happening? What's happening is the plane which is perpendicular to this particular beam, because beam is fixed. The plane which is perpendicular to the beam is going to change. And the moment the plane which is perpendicular to the beam is going to change, my diffraction pattern is going to change. Depending on which plane is perpendicular to the beam, the diffraction patterns keep changing. And in case I am able to have a 90-degree rotation possible in my sample, which is a little difficult, if I can do that, then what I see is again after rotating the sample by 90 degrees, I will once again get a four-fold diffraction pattern. Provided my sample is cubic. If my sample is not cubic, when I rotate, if it is a tetragonal crystal, if I rotate my sample by 90 degrees, what will I get? I get a two-fold. How do I look at a two-fold? My two-fold diffraction pattern will look like this. I will have a central spot, which is a transmitted spot. I will have a two-fold pattern which looks like this, which has this length being different from this length. And the moment I see the diffraction pattern, I can find out that yes, this is nothing but a two-fold diffraction pattern with a 90 degrees here. And please remember, two-fold means there has to be a 90 degree. Without 90 degrees, there is no two-fold. Right? Just because A is not equal to B will not give you a two-fold. That is the reason why, for example, if I take crystal structure such as triclinic, there also A is not equal to B, but I don't have a two-fold. And if I go to a monoclinic, A not equal to B, but not equal to C. But how many two-folds we have in a monoclinic? Only one two-fold, because there is only one 90 degree axis there. Right? Only one of the angles are 90, rest of the two angles are not 90. That is the reason why. Whereas orthorhombic, when I come to, A is not equal to B, not equal to C. But all the angles are 90 degrees. Because all the angles are 90 degrees, I am able to see three two-folds. The X is a two-fold, Y is a two-fold, the Z is a two-fold. That's the reason. So 90 degrees is must. If there is no 90 degrees, we don't call it as a rectangle, right? The definition of a rectangle is that it has to have that 90 degrees. And unless it is not a rectangle, it does not have a two-fold. For example, if I have a trapezium, it does not have a two-fold. Right? So just because there are two parallel lines, even if I have this, what do you call this? Parallelogram. Okay. So such a parallelogram also does not have a two-fold. So you have to have a 90 degree to have a two-fold symmetry. This is very essential. So this is how you can see, and from that. But because that 90 degree rotation may not be possible in most of the TEMs, then what we see is, I look for, are there any other planes? There are so many planes in the crystal structure, right? And each of the plane has certain symmetry. There is a particular plane in a cube which is called the octahedral plane. And what are the indices of that octahedral plane? 1, 1, 1. What is the symmetry of that plane? It has a three-fold symmetry. And similar plane, if I look at it in tetragonal, it has a three-fold symmetry. It does not have a three-fold symmetry. Now, if I know the angle between this plane and this plane, that means my 100 or 001, whatever plane this is, okay, to 111 plane. If I know the angle between these two, and that's the reason why if you want to do TEM and particularly analyze the diffraction patterns, you need to have a thorough knowledge of crystallography. Without that, one cannot do TEM. So if you know that crystallography, people actually, there are standard equations which can be used to find out the angles between any two planes, because any two planes can be represented by two vectors which are plane normals. If I have a plane, this one, I can represent this plane with a plane normal. Okay? If I have this plane, I can represent this 111 plane with a plane normal. And if I take both of them as two vectors, I can find out the angle between those two vectors. And there are equations which will give you those two. And if I can find out that, that is 57.3 degrees in this particular case. So 90 degree rotation may be difficult in samples, in a TEM, in some of the TEMs, but this rotation may be possible. And if I do that, I rotate this sample by 57 degrees. And suddenly I see that I get a diffraction pattern which exactly looks like this. And of course, you will see this pattern extends doing that. So you see this kind of a pattern. And if this pattern, if I look at it, this angle is 60 degrees. And if this distance is equal, then that is. But you may say, sir, why this particular pattern looks like a six-fold symmetry for me? But you are just now saying, sir, that that particular plane has three-fold symmetry. What is this difference? The difference is because whenever I am doing diffraction and all these parts are nothing but certain HKL planes, What are those HKL planes? I'll come to it in a minute. HKL planes with certain intensity. And in an X-ray diffraction pattern, the peak height will tell me the intensity. In case of electron diffraction, what will tell me the intensity? Spot, brightness of the spot. Perfect. The brightness of the spot will tell me the intensity. For example, I know in a FCC crystal, the 111 peak is the most intense and the 200 will be less intense. Similarly, if I look at it here, the 111 plane, if it is there in the diffraction pattern, that will have more intensity, and when compared to the other planes which have a lower intensity. So that intensity can be seen in terms of brightness, and for modeling, people take it as diameter of the spot. Whenever I want to do model these diffraction patterns, we simply assume the diameter of this particular spot as an indication. Why I have to tell you is, after a little while, we will go into what are called ordered disordered structures. In case of ordered structures, in one of the XRD classes, we talked about that whenever you take a ordered crystals and send an X-ray beam on that, you will get an additional peaks, we said. We call them as superlattice reflections. I really do not know whether you have gone through that particular class, and you will see that you get additional peaks. For example, in a normal FCC, you get a 111 and 200. That's it, right? What is the condition for FCC? For finding a peak? Yes, anybody? What is the condition? We call these conditions as extinction conditions. The word extinction condition comes from the word extinct. That means if this condition is not satisfied, the peak is extinct. Peak does not exist. So that kind of a condition, what is the condition to allow make a peak appear in the diffraction pattern? All should be all, or all should be even. And this is what we call it as HKL should be unmixed, we say. Unmixed. That means they should not, you should not have odd even mixed HKL. They should be either all odd or all even. So this is satisfies that 111200. But if I do, if I take the same sample, which is an ordered sample, what do I mean by an ordered sample? If I look at this, for example, I draw a structure for you. Let's say, have you heard of a compound called Cu3Au? Yes? And Au3Cu? And there are also compounds such as Ni3Al. Have you ever heard of this compound? Where is this? Where does this come in your understanding, in your studies? Which kind of materials this particular compound is there? It's a very, very, very important compound, and used in certain commercial alloys for a very important application. It's an intermetallic. All of them are intermetallics. But where is this particular intermetallic used? Ni3Al. Have you ever heard of superalloys? So where do we use them? High temperature application. For example, turbine blades in a aircraft are made of these superalloys. So if you take a nickel-based superalloy, in a nickel-based superalloy, it is this compound, there aluminum added to a nickel-based superalloy to form this Ni3Al, and it is this Ni3Al which gives you very high strength and the high creep resistance in these particular alloys. So Ni3Al is a very important thing. And if you carefully look at it, its structure is based on FCC, and it has 3 atoms of nickel, 1 atom of aluminum. And in FCC, you see that you have corner atoms. How many total number of atoms are there at the corner? 1. Just 1, not 8. So that's what we say. There is one lattice point, we say. There is one lattice point. And in this particular case, we can say 1 atom. And you have 3, right? So if this particular Ni3Al has this FCC structure, and if it gets ordered, what happens is all these base centers get occupied by nickel, and all these corners aluminum takes. So this is exactly similar to your sodium chloride structure. And if you take that kind of a structure where you will see the atoms have a ordered preferred positions. They are not randomly sitting inside the unit cell, but each of these atoms has a fixed position in the unit cell. And if that is the case, you will see in the XRD pattern, you get from such a material, if you subject it to X-ray diffraction, you get additional peaks. No, you don't get an additional peak here, but you get an additional peak here. This is 111 with a h square plus k square plus l square as 3. This has a h square plus k square plus l square as 4. And you can have two additional peaks before, which is a 100 peak and 110 peak, which will not appear in a normal FCC because it has to satisfy that it should be unmixed. HKL should not be mixed. Whereas the moment it is ordered, you will get additional peaks. These are called superlattice reflections. In one of the classes on X-ray, we talked about it. And this peaks will appear. And in a diffraction pattern, if there is such a ordered structure, you will see the peaks appearing as small dots. Because the intensity of these superlattice reflections is always smaller than what we call these as fundamental reflections. All those HKLs which satisfy this HKL unmix, those particular peaks are called fundamental peaks. Those peaks which do not satisfy this condition but still appear, and they will appear only if it is ordered. They will not appear if it is a disordered. What do I mean by disordered crystal? Disordered crystal does not mean that it is an amorphous material. That is where all of you should know that there are two types of order that we talk about. One is called a structural order, another is called a chemical order. What is the meaning of structural order? Any material which has a fixed unit cell, we say it is structurally ordered. A material which does not have a unit cell, atoms are randomly arranged. There is no unit cell that I can define. For example, glasses, we call them as amorphous. Right? Once you have a unit cell, you can have a material which is a pure metal which has a unit cell. You can have a material which is an alloy and still have a unit cell. For example, this is an alloy. Ni3Al has two elements. And these two elements have now a choice either to randomly get arranged. That means what? The probability of finding nickel at this point, at any point inside the unit cell, if it is equivalent to 0.75, because it is 3 atoms out of the 4 atoms, then I call it as simply a disordered FCC lattice. Disordered FCC lattice. Please remember this word. If I have, instead of that, if the probability of finding nickel at any one of these face-centered positions is 1, but the probability of finding the same nickel at this body corner is 0, that means I will never see nickel atom at the body corner, then I call this as an ordered structure. That means inside the unit cell, I have certain fixed positions for each of these atoms. And they go and sit only in those positions. For example, in sodium chloride, sodium has to sit somewhere and chlorine has to sit somewhere. Chlorine cannot go and sit in where the sodium is. It's not possible. So similarly here, if this kind of a specific preferred sites are there for each of the atom, we call it as a chemically ordered material. A structurally ordered material can be either chemically ordered or chemically disordered. It is not possible that a material is chemically ordered but structurally disordered. It is not possible. That means something which has a chemical order, that means there are fixed positions for nickel and aluminum, but it does not have a unit cell at all. Such thing does not happen, because that means all amorphous materials are both structurally and chemically disordered. There cannot be an amorphous material which is chemically ordered. Because the moment I say amorphous, it means that it has no unit cell. If it has no unit cell, there is no fixed positions for various metals, various atoms to sit. So the moment I say it is amorphous, it is also means it is chemically also disordered. But the moment I say it has a crystal structure, now it has an option. It can be chemically ordered, it can be chemically disordered. All solid solutions are chemically disordered. For example, if I take, let's say, ferrite, alpha ferrite, where carbon is dissolved into iron, it is a chemically disordered. It will have a unit cell which is a BCC unit cell, but inside the BCC unit cell, the carbon atoms can sit anywhere. Of course, they will only sit in interstitial positions, but interstitial positions also, there are so many interstitial positions. There is no fixed interstitial positions where the carbon will go and sit. Whereas, there are certain compounds, for example, have you heard of this? What is this material? It's a piezoelectric material. Very good. It's a piezoelectric material. And in this barium titanate, barium sits somewhere, titanium sits somewhere, and oxygen sits somewhere. Can you tell me which has the largest ionic size here? Out of these three? So the largest ionic size material will actually form the actual unit cell. And the remaining two go and sit in those what are called interstices. But they sit in specific interstices to get you what is called an ordered structure. So that kind of, so in a Fe3C, it is not like that. Carbon can sit in even of the interstices, but it prefers to sit in one particular type of interstice, which is what interstice it is. Where does carbon want to sit? Octahedral sites. In what structure? In FCC. But in BCC, it goes and sits in tetrahedral, because tetrahedral is bigger void. So it tries to sit in a bigger void just for the sake of comfortability. Just because the void is bigger and this atom is bigger, so it wants to sit where a bigger void is available. But even octahedral sites in an FCC, there are in a particular unit cell. How many octahedral sites are there? FCC, how many? 4. And if carbon has to sit in all the 4, then how many carbon atoms we should have? If you have a FCC unit cell, how many atoms are there in FCC unit cell? 4 atoms, right? And how many octahedral voids? 4. If all the atoms have to be occupied by iron and all the voids have to be occupied by carbon, then you should have a compound FeC. Then you will see equal amount of iron and carbon. Iron will go and sit in all those face centered and body corner positions. Carbon will go and sit in all the 4 octahedral voids, perfectly matching. But you don't have such a compound. The compound that we have in this phase diagram is only Fe3C. That means for 3 atoms of iron, only 1 atom of carbon is there. That means not all the octahedral voids are filled. Out of these 4 octahedral void, which one carbon will go and sit is not your choice. It just goes and sits randomly in one of those octahedral voids. In one unit cell, it may be sitting in one octahedral void. In another unit cell, it may be sitting in another octahedral void. So as a result, these are not ordered structures. Okay. So this is one thing that we have to remember, that most of these cases, until it becomes a compound, and particularly an ordered compound. Not all compounds are ordered. There are also compounds which are ordered at lower temperature. The moment I heat it to beyond a particular temperature, it becomes disordered. Have you heard of copper, zinc, beta brass? Beta brass is ordered at low temperatures, and when I heat it to higher temperature, it becomes disordered. And this kind of ordered disordered transitions can take place. So as a result, what I am trying to hint at is, if you have an ordered, you get additional spots. But what is more important to understand is, why is that though I am expecting a 3-fold symmetry, I am seeing a 6-fold symmetry. The reason for that is, if you look at the intensity is the square of structure factor, right? So if I look at the intensity of a 111 plane and the intensity of a bar 1 plane, the intensity of both of them will always be equal, right? Because the structure factor of this and structure factor of this is only negative of the other. But once I am taking a square of it, it doesn't matter. So as a result, the moment I see a peak of 111, because the intensity of this is also equal to that, I will also see a peak of that. In a diffraction pattern like this, if this has certain particular HKL, this is negative of that, because this has been an inversion symmetry there. So if this is HKL, this is H bar, K bar, L bar. If this is some other HKL, H1, K1, L1, this will be H bar 1, K bar 1, L bar 1. So like that, I will be able to see. So though I am expecting only 3 spots, that means maybe if I can use a colored pen, I am supposed to, let's say, get only this part and this part and let's say this part, which are 3/4 symmetry for me. But because the intensity of this will also be equivalent to that, then automatically I will get one more here. Similarly, because the intensity of this is equal to that, because of my this rule, which is called the Freedom's law, because of this, I will definitely see the other 3 spots also and make it as if it appears as a 6-fold. And one can do certain ways to actually find out whether it is really a 3-fold symmetry or a 6-fold symmetry by doing what is called convergent beam. There are special techniques. I will not go into those details because maybe at this level it is possibly not necessary for you, but one can go to special techniques where I converge my electron beam, make my electron beam very, very small, of the order of around 10 nanometer diameter or so. Usually the electron beam that falls on the sample is having a diameter of the order of around 1 micron or so. So this makes it very difficult to find out that, but when I converge my beam, make my beam very small, I will be able to see this difference, and that is a slightly involved subject. We will stop here.